Welcome to Uncensored Conservatism. This is episode number 265. So, the transgender phenomena. How the hell did we get to where we are today from a precious few years ago? This is Call Me Leah Fink, a Minnesota state legislator who wrote a bill that declared Minnesota a refuge state for minors seeking gender reassignment surgery. God damn, that's an ugly man. And this is Wilson Elias, a Washington state legislator who sponsored a law that allows the state to legally hide the children seeking gender reassignment interventions from their parents. So the whole phenomena is devoid of philosophical sense, and it really makes me want to puke at times. The American Psychological Association tells us, quote, transgender is an umbrella term for persons whose gender identity, gender expression, or behavior does not conform to the sex they were assigned at birth. Notice that last phrase there, sex assigned at birth. This is Dr. Deanna Atkins of Duke University. She argues that gender identity is the only true determinant for one's sex, and the rest is just bad science, and that bad science happens to include, things like male and female chromosomes, male and female hormones, internal reproductive organs, external genitalia, and secondary sexual characteristics. So until recently, gender was a social construct, and one's sex was a biological reality. But now the transgender activists say that biological sex is the social construct. So philosophically, it all makes a little sense. And if you follow politics, you have some idea of gender ideology. There is the gender unicorn, to help explain it. And this inspires every letter in the expanding LGB moniker. At some point, they're going to run out of colors to put on the flag. At this point, we must discern between sexual orientation and gender. Sexual orientation is who one is attracted to, same or opposite sex, homosexual or heterosexual. Transgender is what you feel you are. Some researchers assert that homosexuality and transgenderism is determined prenatally. Sexual anatomy develops at about 6 weeks of gestation. At around 6 months, the brain is exposed or not exposed to a surge of testosterone. The theory goes that although the sexual organs are already there early, later the brain is either masculinized or feminized. The supposition is that the environment then plays no role. Hence, being transgender is predetermined and an immutable trait. But how can an immutable trait be fluid or non-binary? You see, even if it's true, which is doubtful, the whole thing makes no sense. And even if true also, it fails to explain why some biological females in the womb, exposed to the same surge of testosterone, later identify 100% as female. And since we're talking about testosterone exposure, a male hormone, what about the male in the womb? Do they become hypermales later in life? This belief is simply a justification, bad one at that transgenderism is an immutable trait determined prenatally, and that it should therefore be accepted, much like the color of your skin. Further, the actual cases of these biological causes are relatively rare in reality. There's only about 500 known cases in the medical literature, and it's known as hermaphroditism. Now, there is the instance of Guevedoches in the Dominican Republic, where the child is born and appears to be female at birth, and they're raised as a female. At puberty, their genitals develop and they are suddenly male. Although rare, this illustrates how environment, the nurture part of the nature-nurture paradigm, can clearly affect one's gender identity, but not biology. And if this can be done innocently in these extremely rare cases, it can be done on a more grand scale with the upsurge in the incidence of transgenderism sweeping the country. When you have school districts allowing males to compete as girls in sports or use a female bathroom, or the media portraying the male who won the decathlon at the 1976 Olympics as a woman, Or states like California allowing children to physically change their sex based on a feeling and then insisting the surrounding world conform to this feeling, be it the choice of a sport, a bathroom, or preferred pronouns. You have a huge environmental factor. In the interim, if you dare question this, you're a bigot or a Christo-fascist. After all, drag is just another art form, right? And school districts are not facilitating gender transitions and hiding it from parents either, right? The whole I identify as shtick is nonsense from the start, unless you're like Rachel Dolezal or Sean Smith or whatever. If I identify as African American, that does not make me African American. I can darken my skin and kink my hair until I look African American, but I remain truly Caucasian, and it's the same way with sex. Okay? If I have a certain set of chromosomes, I am male no matter how much I identify as a female, no matter how many hormones I put in my body or which body part I lop off. That is an immutable fact. Despite extremely rare chromosomal abnormalities, the science, which we're told to follow, knows no other category of humans other than male and female. Yet today, major universities, medical schools, and even the administration of Joe Biden were advocating a feeling, not objective scientific fact. Planned Parenthood now openly advertises gender euphoria services where for the low cost of $59 a month, you can get a 30-minute telehealth conference followed by a month's supply of hormones to facilitate your transition. I guess they have to make up for the loss in abortion dollars or something. So whether you are male or female is determined at conception when an egg is fertilized by an X or Y sperm. That is called a scientific fact. Humans are born either male or female, plain and simple. It is not assigned. No amount of self-perception, self-identification, or affirmation from the pseudoscientific community can change that. The largest study of twin transsexual adults found that only 20% of identical twins identified as transgender. If this is biologically predetermined, as some suggest, the rate would be 100%. And clinical studies have in fact shown that social reinforcement, parental psychopathology, family dynamics, and social contagion are the primary causes of the rapid increase in the number of people declaring their transgender status. Further studies have shown that children with gender dysphoria is radically reduced when they are not encouraged to impersonate the opposite sex. This is the conclusion of a paper by the American College of Pediatricians, which sent shockwaves through the medical community for some reason. It further landed them on the list of hate groups of the Southern Poverty Law Center because they presented a scientific fact. They were equated with the KKK and neo-Nazis. In 2018, Dr. Lisa Lippman reported on the uptick in transgender adolescents, especially females. Susanna Diaz and J. Michael Bailey followed up on this observation by studying 1,655 parental reports of gender dysphoria in their adolescent children. The findings were astounding and found 75% of transgenders were biological females. 42% had a pre-existing formal mental health issue. A majority of parents felt pressured by professionals to go along with some kind of gender transitioning regimen. Before showing signs of gender dysphoria, their kids spent an average of 4.5 hours on social media platforms, and over 73% reported a stressful life event before the onset of the dysphoria. So this is Dr. Blair Peters, who describes themselves as a queer surgeon at the Oregon Health and Science University in Portland, Oregon, who testified before Congress that even though an expert in so-called gender science, they were still just figuring out what worked and what did not work. During that hearing, Representative Matt Gaetz questions Shannon Minter, shown here, of the National Center for Lesbian Rights, about the Washington law mentioned earlier that hides runaway transgender kids from their parents. Minter, of course, denied the accusation. Yet, doctors are being sued because of language and laws like that in Washington and forced to bend to the will of people like Minter. Children as young as 8 years old are given opposite sex hormones. Girls as young as 13 receive double mastectomies. Excuse me. In 15 states, the medical profession is banned from a wait-and-see period when it comes to transitioning regimens, even though 85 to 90% of gender dysphoric kids grow out of it after puberty, which may explain why the rate of suicide of those who undergo these treatments during adolescence or childhood are 19 times more likely to commit suicide than a transgender adult. Other studies have found that 72.7% of females aged 15 to 19 who say they are transgender at that time are not transgender within 5 years of their pronouncement. With males, the desistance rate is highest among those who identify as transgender between the ages of 20 and 24, and this makes perfect sense because the female brain matures before the male brain for whatever reason. This study also revealed that over the time period, the number of those diagnosed as transgender has increased 780%. Now, some of that was due because of how things were coded, but controlling for that, the incidence still increased by almost 300%. So join me tomorrow for part 2 of the series about the transgender phenomenon, when we will continue to look at the science behind gender dysphoria and how transgender mania is perhaps the greatest thing to set back feminism and women since the days of the witch trials. Have a great day and a more pleasant tomorrow.